Hello everyone, nubkeks here. Welcome back to Nub Raids, and today we've got two champion rebalances that I think are going to be very welcome amongst the community. We've got Ailil and The Calamitus getting buffed. We're going to take a look at Ailil first, and I think what's really nice about this, he was a former guaranteed champion, and also in the Sylvan Watchers faction, which is fairly lacking in damage dealers. So him getting a chance to shine, I think, is really good. Now, going into this, by the way, I think if I asked 100 of my viewers, or well, let's say just 100 raid players in general, is Ailil good? I think 99 out of 100 would probably say Ailil trash, legendary, absolutely useless. As you guys who've watched my videos will know, though, hopefully know, I would be one of the 100, the 1 out of 100 that would say, actually, Ailil's pretty good. He's not like OP, but he's actually a pretty good champion. And I do use him on my late game account, or end game account, really. I use him, and he's quite nice. I actually started using him again after He-Man, and I actually use him more than He-Man, because for me, He-Man's big advantage is his speed aura. They're very similar champions, though. I think Ailil just fits my account better. We'll talk more about it. Let's see what's changed with them, though. With this rebalance, Ailil received a simple yet impactful damage boost, making him a greater threat in the battlefield. That's definitely what people would say. I think Ailil has incredible utility, but his damage is in some ways low. We've increased the damage output for both his A1 and A3. His A2 now additionally ignores 25% defense, and his aura has been changed to do attack. So, I mean, the aura change is simple enough. It's now 30% attack in all battles. Before, it was 25% crit in all battles. I mean, that's actually pretty strong, but it's just not really used. I would say 30% attack is not that exciting. It's pretty standard. It's not too exciting. Like 25% crit rate is a massive boost, but again, it's just not useful. Like, you just don't build people with that low crit rate. So it's a positive change, but not too crazy. Like a speed aura would have been spicier for sure. But attack aura is standard enough, and it's good. A1 damage increased, A3 damage increased. His A1, it's got good utility, a bit more damage there, is definitely decent. I do think his A3, the damage on this was definitely a little bit low. This is, for me, the one part of his kit that definitely needed a boost, and it's really good to see that. It's got great utility. What is interesting about Ailil is he has, in my opinion, really benefited from the changing meta, where, as you guys can see, from his passive is insane. He gets a ton of HP and defense the more attack he has. So the more power scaling, i.e. relics, blessings, etc., that are in the game, he's getting like doubling down on the stats. He's getting extra value. That's great. And then he also gets 10% turn meter whenever he receives a buff, which is extremely good as well. Now, here's the thing. This passive, this turn meter gain is so strong. That's his big advantage. Even if he was having relatively low damage before, you can see I've built him incredibly slow. I can build him like 100 speed slower than my other nukers, and he'll still be almost as fast. I even have him with the cat's gaze. My 4th cat's gaze. I have it on Ailil because I do use him a lot. You can build him really slow, and therefore you can build his stats incredibly high, right? Like, I've got him with 9,000 attack, man. He's crazy high in attack. Why? Because, again, you just don't need to build much speed once you put him with buff champions. And I think he does combo very well with champions like Arbase and Lazarius, like mythicals that have the speed aura and can provide him with multiple buffs to let him just take all load of turns and destroy people. Because he's got insane utility on these moves. They buffed his A2 before. It now properly ignores Stone Skin. That for me is an advantage of him over He-Man. He-Man, bad against Force. Ailil doesn't have any affinity problems. And his passive actually makes him pretty tanky, which is nice. I think, like, this is actually pretty spicy. I think this A2, now ignoring 25% defense, is crazy good. Again, because you can build him slower, by the way, you can build him in 6-piece Merciless. I think you could also build him like 4-piece Lethal, 4-piece Pinpoint, if you're concerned about triggering Polymorph. There's also the fact that Polymorph is just not quite as common because of Pinpoint. It's not as common now as it used to be. So definitely the meta has changed in his favor. This move, though, because you can build him relatively slow with high stats, I mean, this already hits pretty hard. It was already a good move, good damage move. Now it's going to be extremely good. Shield is like the one thing that does get in its way. But I think with the 25% defense ignore, he's going to be honestly disgusting. I think he becomes quite a reasonable alternative to Georgid, actually. Georgid, interestingly enough, Georgid's a little unreliable. Ailil becomes, it's worth considering. Georgid ignores more stuff, which is cool, but his ignore defense is stronger, but it's a 50-50. Ailil, he won't hit as hard as Georgid when this triggers, nowhere near as hard, but he will hit a lot harder than Georgid will when this passive doesn't trigger, so he'll be more reliable. Now, he won't have the extra turn. That's what Georgid can do, but against an enemy team in Stone Skin, Ailil has the advantage, or he's got a unique piece of utility where he gives himself Stone Skin if he kills an enemy. And because he's actually quite tanky, his Stone Skin shield's actually quite substantial. It's actually quite powerful. I think there's definitely something to be said for this champ, but he could be very good as well with like Shuzan as well. Very strong. So I think he's pretty cool. This move hitting harder is nice. It's got great utility. And yeah, that's sort of it. I was already a bit of a Georgia Ailil stan. I quite like him. He's not OP, but he's good. Now he becomes very strong, a very reliable one-shot through Stone. One of the most, perhaps the most reliable one-shot an enemy through Stone Skin champ in the game. And then he's chilling with Stone Skin, right? So you can build him like me, build him slow, in Merciless, and he is going to delete people, sit there in Stone Skin. His AoE, you definitely is not too strong, but this will make it better. And yeah, I mean, again, you got the potential for 4-piece lethal, 4-piece pinpoint. It's pretty fun. I think it's pretty cool. An Informer guaranteed champion. He's definitely worth considering. Next up, then, we have the Calamitus. The Calamitus, again, I think if you asked 100 people, 99 would say he's bad, and a 1 would say he's good. This time, though, I would be part of the 99 saying he's pretty bad. He's a good champion in general, but he's very, very bad for a mythical. By mythical standards, he's much lower use than the others. He's got some nice changes, and then a couple of interesting ones, quite interesting tweaks. And by the way, there's so much text here, I can't even fit it all on the one screen, so we'll have to come back for all of it. But here we go. With this rebalance, we've aimed not only to boost he's not Calamitus, he's the Calamitus, excuse me, Raid. Calamitus's damage, but also enhance his kit to better reflect the unique strengths of each of his forms. So his base form, extra 20% crit chance on his A1 and A2, and it's also on his alternate form, extra 20% crit. So just straight up now, that's a great boost. You can build Calamitus with 80% crit rate, and he's an extra 20% on all of his skills. So that lets you push his stats much higher. That's fantastic. Before, he had this weird thing, it's still there, where his A3 was always critical, but you needed to build crit rate for his other skills. So why was this attack always critical? It's the ethos problem. It just doesn't make any sense. Funny enough, they haven't changed it. His A3 is still always critical. Bit weird, that's a thing, but yeah, hey, it is what it is. I mean, you just sort of ignore the always critical part and you just build him with 80% crit rate now, which is cool. On his base form, his A2 now does more damage and progressively ignores up to 25% defense with each consecutive hit. So yeah, now it's again that extra 20% chance to crit. It's a 4-hitter. First hit ignores 10% defense, and then each subsequent hit ignores an additional 5%, and the damage has gone up. This should be an absolutely huge single target clap now. So more damage, and then an extra 5% defense on his second hit, 10% more on the third, and 15% more on the fourth. That's nice. That's great. So this is a really good single target move now. That's a great change. And then his A3 ignores 20% defense now. Sorry, where is it? Down here. Ignores 20% defense. Yeah. So the A3, it always crits. Again, you build him with 80. It's always going to crit. Gives him unkillable if he kills an enemy. If he kills 2 enemies, he gets unkillable for 2 turns. But now it ignores 20% defense. So he's got a big ignore defense single target nuke and now a big ignore defense AoE nuke in his base form, which is cool. Now, one spicy thing about his base form, they have reworked his passive. His passive completely reworked. His old one was interesting. Healed him by 50% max HP at the start of his turn. It's interesting. It potentially opened up some solo strategies. I don't know if anyone actually used any of those solo strategies. You know, certainly you might have the rare player that gets Calamitus very early, but typically you've got to play the game. If you're free to play, you're typically playing the game for a couple of years before you pull a mythical. Unlikely to be that useful then, I would think. You'd have to be getting him early. But yeah, he's got a new passive now. It's been totally reworked. At the start of his turn, places a shield buff equal to 50% of his max HP on him for 1 turn, and increase attack on him for 1 turn. I think this new passive is way better. He is now a self-buffing increase attack champ with a massive single target 4-hitter nuke, with a really solid AoE nuke, albeit on a 4 turn. Self-buffs increase attack, gives himself a really substantial shield. It's not going to make him tanky. You're building him for damage. He'll still be fairly squishy, but it makes him somewhat survivable. I think it's good. So his base form is a huge improvement. Let me get the stuff. Well, his alternate form. I'll get you the specifics in a second. Let's look at the summary first. 20% extra crit chance on all of his skills. Yes. A2 ignores 20% defense baseline, up to 35% if they're under Hex. A3 cooldown reduced, and his passive is healing him from damage against Hex, and his attack is increased. Let's get the specifics. Let's really break it down. It's a great change as well. Okay, so here we go. Alternate form. This is exactly what's changing. So his A1 is still sort of the same thing, right? But now just the extra chance to crit, so you can just build him with better stats. His A2, 20% extra chance to crit. Ignores 20% defense, 35% defense if they're under Hex. So the old version was doing 10% more damage for each debuff on the target, and ignore 20% defense if they're under Hex. So it's still doing it's still doing 10% damage for each debuff on the target. So the difference now is this just by default ignores 20% defense. That goes up to a whopping 35% defense ignore if they're under Hex. That is very strong. If we consider Hydra, okay, Hydra, easy to get Hex, and he places Hex, and the cooldown's going down, so that's actually really good. Enemies are under Hex. 35% defense ignore. Put him in a 6-piece Merciless set, an extra 35, now you're up to 70%. Get your 20% area bonuses, you're up to 90% defense ignore. 90% defense ignore against enemies in Hydra is kind of crazy. Now, you probably run Helm Smasher on him anyways, so you'd be overcapping a bit. But like you run him in a Rethi Coronet with the Nature's Wrath Blessing, and the dude's gonna be clapping. This is really good. I mean, it was already good, but now it's more consistent. And you got that flat 20% defense ignore as well, which is cool. So, you know, you can cleanse him and whatnot. So that's nice. His A3, so extra 20% chance to crit, good. And then the cooldown's going down. This is, for me, the obvious change that needed to happen. AoE, Hex, decreased defense. 4-turn cooldown? Guys, this is a mythical. It's a mythical, man. Like, what is that? That's shocking. Way out of date. 3 turns, yes. Straightforward. So now he's got a 3-turn cooldown, decreased defense, Hex. That makes him much, much better against Hydra. He's a reliable source for that. Great. And then his passive, Banquet of Death. Whenever he attacks an enemy under Hex, he heals for 30% of the damage. So easy, very easy to keep. He's going to full heal himself every time. Easy to keep himself alive. He's also going to destroy his max HP against Decay very quickly, funny enough. But yeah, I mean, that's fine. Fully heals himself if he kills an enemy under Hex. I mean, considering he is more of a Hydra champion, you know, I think this is better. It's a better version of it. And it increases his attack by 20% for each enemy under Hex. The old version was 10% for each enemy under Hex. So, wow. Again, in Hydra, instead of having 40% bonus attack, now he's going to have 80% bonus attack. Pretty consistent, and he's more consistent at hexing. It's a really big buff. Honestly, guys, Calamitus needed a really big buff. I mean, we look at those in-game reviews. Yikes. I mean, I think that's not accurate. 2.1 in Hydra. That's not accurate. Obviously, none of this stuff is accurate. But, you know, you would expect a Hydra. He's clearly, you know, he ignores Life Barrier, Poison Cloud. I mean, come on. He's clearly a Hydra champion. And for a mythical, you really want your mythical to be, I don't want them to be a 5 out of 5, don't you? For Hydra, if he's a Hydra mythical. You know, you finally pull a mythical. It's taken you years of waiting, months and years of waiting. You finally get your mythical, and he's only okay. Pretty bad. I think that he's in a much better spot. How good will he be? I'm not sure. I'll test it out. We'll test it out when we get access to him on the test server. But yeah, big chunk of extra attack, big chunk of free crit rate and all of his skills. Shorter cooldown on this, bigger ignore defense on this. healing himself as well. I think his form 2 should be a lot better. A lot better. Yeah, I'm expecting more. I don't know if he's going to be top tier, but he'll be very good. He'd be very, very good. And then his form 1, I think, gets a lot better as well. And he becomes a much more solid arena champion then, too. I mean, you probably are running him in Merciless for wave content, to be honest. But yeah, for arena, I mean, he's, again, the extra crit rate. He's going to hit hard. Big single target, big AoE, stealth buffs. He should be quite decent, actually, for arena. And he keeps refreshing the shield every turn as well. I don't believe there's any cooldown on his form 1, increase attack and shield passive, which is cool. So yeah, I think it's a big improvement to Calamitus. We'll see. We'll test him out. He might not be. I don't think he's gonna be, you know, obviously on the levels of like a Nice, the Shadow Thief, or you know, Galathea or anything like that. I don't think he's jumped up to the best mythical of the best, but he might be. He might be decent now. I mean, he's not going to be absolutely terrible. I'll tell you that. He'll be decent. Will he be good enough? I don't know. Let me know. But yeah, I think. I've been waiting a long time for a buff to the Calamitus. That's great. For me personally, I think they should be much quicker at buffing mythicals because, again, I just feel for players, it takes so long to get a mythical. How heartbreaking is it? You finally get your mythical and your mythical sucks, you know? And there's others like that. Like, I mean, I really think Gallius needs a buff. I think that Ashnar needs a buff. Garol, definitely, probably Form 1 needs a buff. For Form 2 is fine. You know, but there's definitely a bunch of mythicals that are pretty meh. And that's heartbreaking when you pull them. It really, really is. So yeah, a bad mythical getting improved is brilliant. So yeah, I don't think he's going to be top tier, but I think he's going to be good. And Ailil, again, I don't think Ailil will be top tier, but I thought he was already good. I think he'd be very good now. I think he's good for sure. Combos well at Necret as well. I don't know if I mentioned that, but Necret, he can be super fast, which is fun. So there you go. Let me know what you think. They are the rebalances. Good job, Plarium. Again, as always, we always want to see more of these, more buffs, more often, more. These ones are good though. Thanks. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.